My name is Pamma. I'm 30, a freelance graphic designer living in Lisbon, Portugal. But this story doesn't begin in the sunlit mornings when I would sit by the window, sketching digital paintings while the Mediterranean sunlight poured over my workspace. No, it begins in a childhood suffocated by silence, in a cold house on the outskirts of Lisbon where my mother, Mariana, 52, a retired nurse, turned my life into an invisible prison. My mother suffered from misophonia, or at least that's what she claimed. She said that any sound caused her unbearable pain, as if laughter, crying, or even the simple sound of my breathing was a dagger stabbing straight into her head. From a young age, I learned to tiptoe through life. The squeak of the floorboards under my small feet, the clatter of a dropped spoon, even the rustle of my own clothing could send her into quiet, venomous rage. I quickly became fluent in the language of invisibility, perfecting the art of moving silently, of shrinking myself into corners of rooms where she wouldn't notice me. Friends were rare, and school felt like another battlefield because I carried with me the weight of constant self-surveillance. Every sound I made had consequences, every laugh or sigh carefully measured. Growing up under her watchful ears, I internalized a fear that would linger far beyond the walls of that house, shaping the woman I was yet to become. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. My earliest memory is from when I was 6, falling hard on the playground, scraping my knees, and crying uncontrollably. My mother shoved a dirty handkerchief into my mouth and whispered, "Be quiet, Pamma, you're killing me." I was far too small to understand, but I learned immediately that silence was the only path to safety. Every sob, every wail, every desperate plea could set her off, and I learned to measure my own voice as if it were a dangerous weapon. By the time I turned 9, my birthday came with an unexpected gift, a homemade score chart which she called the silent point system. Every act of silence I performed was meticulously recorded, and those points dictated whether I would eat or go hungry. A slice of bread was worth 2 points, a piece of salmon 10. Being silent while bathing earned 3 points, and not snoring while sleeping earned 8. My mother never arbitrarily deducted points, but the system was absolute. I had to purchase my food with my quiet. I was a little girl with bright, hopeful eyes and a heart that longed to please her. I would wrap my arms around her tightly, never speaking a word, careful not to provoke her. I began to live like a ghost in my own home. Mornings were exercises in extreme caution. I would draw the curtains with painstaking slowness, dress in the school bathroom to avoid creaking the floorboards, and step as lightly as I could across the kitchen tiles. Every movement was calculated, every sound measured. One day, she presented me with the score sheet displaying a perfect 30 points, decorated with hand-drawn smiley faces and hearts. I was allowed to choose my dinner from the fridge, though my favorite treat, ice cream, remained out of reach. I didn't yet have enough points. That night, she prepared sardines, but in her characteristic way, she cooked them tough and dry, forcing me to chew slowly, deliberately, so as not to produce even a hint of sound. Eating had become an exercise in control and endurance. I could feel the weight of her scrutiny with every bite. Even the slightest crunch or swallow that deviated from the expected rhythm would draw her cold stare. I learned to anticipate her moods, to predict the exact moment when a misstep in silence might spark a reprimand. My body became attuned to a constant state of vigilance, my ears perpetually listening for the next shift in her breathing, the next micro-expression on her face. School offered no reprieve. The hallways, the lockers, the playground, they were a battlefield for my self-restraint. Even among friends, I practiced restraint, wary of laughter that might carry back home, wary of the sound of my own joy. Friendships were fleeting, as I couldn't risk fully expressing myself. I was trapped in a silent negotiation with the world, one that began in the shadows of my own house and extended into every corner of my life. I became small, cautious, and endlessly observant. My mother's approval came only when I disappeared into myself, when I moved with the precision of a shadow and spoke only when necessary. Every day under her watchful eyes strengthened the invisible chains around me, teaching me that survival meant becoming invisible, soundless, and wholly attentive to her fragile peace. I tried my hardest, salivating over the sardine to soften it, chewing slowly, willing it to yield under my teeth. But after 5 torturous minutes, I could no longer endure it. In a desperate, secretive move, I spat the piece into a napkin, deciding silently that I would skip dinner that night. My mother saw it immediately. "What are you doing, Pamma?" she screamed, her voice sharp as glass. "A fish has died for you and you dare not respect it?" Trembling, I opened the napkin and stuffed the fish back into my mouth. But in my haste, my tongue brushed against the roof of my mouth, producing a tiny, imperceptible sound. My mother slammed her hand on the table, eyes blazing like fire. "You are a disgrace," she roared, yanking the score chart from my hands and throwing it onto the gas stove. "Do you think I cannot make you feel the pain you make me feel with every sound?" She grabbed my hand, pulling it dangerously close to the flickering flame. "This burning sensation is only 20% of what I feel when you make noise." Thankfully, she never touched my skin to the flame, but the fear paralyzed me completely. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't in pain, but because I knew tears would only provoke harsher punishment. That day, I plunged into the negative points zone. With no points left to purchase food, I survived on water and air alone for 3 excruciating days, refusing even to taste a morsel. By the 4th day, I collapsed during gym class, right on the basketball court, my body giving in to hunger and exhaustion. I woke in a panic, whispering over and over to myself, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make noise. Please don't starve me anymore." Miss Sofia, 45, our school counselor in Lisbon, guided me gently into her office. Her eyes were warm but rimmed with red from worry. She handed me a chocolate bar, a banana, and an energy bar. I devoured them greedily, nearly choking, while she watched silently, her hands trembling slightly. "Pamma, we are going to call Child Protective Services," she said, her voice shaky but firm. Right before my eyes, Miss Sofia picked up the phone and began to report suspected child abuse. I sat frozen, counting each breath carefully, forcing myself to remain as silent as possible. She asked about the score chart, about being starved, about the time my mother had threatened to burn my hand. My voice barely rose above a whisper as I explained, "Mother says she has misophonia. Sounds make her want to hurt herself, so I must stay quiet." Miss Sofia scribbled everything in her notepad, her face paling as the weight of my words sank in. The details were grotesque in their precision, the cruelty layered under the guise of care. I could see her heart breaking with each sentence I murmured, each fragment of my life I recounted, shattering the illusion that home was a safe place. I remembered the countless mornings tiptoeing to the kitchen, the painstaking rituals of brushing my teeth without a sound, dressing in the school bathroom to avoid creaking floorboards, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Silence had been my currency, my armor, my cage. Yet here, in Miss Sofia's office, the walls that had confined me seemed suddenly penetrable, like sunlight spilling through barred windows. Even as she listened, I couldn't stop the trained vigilance inside me. My body remained stiff, my ears straining for any sound that could provoke anger, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Trust was a foreign concept, yet something in her eyes made me cling to a fragile hope that perhaps for the first time someone could see me, not just the quiet, obedient shell, but the frightened, hungry girl inside. The weight of years of fear pressed on me, each memory of my mother's fiery gaze, the sharp slaps, the threat of the flame, and the relentless point system. But amid it all, there was a new sensation, relief. For the first time, I realized that my suffering could be witnessed, acknowledged, and perhaps stopped. Ms. Sofia's pen scratched rapidly, documenting every infraction, every threat, every act of control. I whispered each detail, my voice fragile, trembling but determined to convey the truth. As the minutes stretched, I felt the invisible chains loosen ever so slightly. The nightmare of silence, the terror of missteps, had been given a name outside my own fear. It existed in the world, and there were people who could intervene. That day, for the first time in my life, I understood that survival was not merely about hiding, about tiptoeing through existence. Survival could mean speaking, even in whispers, and having someone listen. My mother's control was absolute at home, but here in this small, sunlit office with the faint smell of chocolate and paper, there was a glimmer of possibility, that perhaps, just perhaps, I could step out of the shadows and reclaim a fragment of my life. When the CPS worker, Anna, 38, arrived, I repeated my story, my voice barely above a whisper. Every word felt heavy in my mouth, yet I forced it out, recounting the terror, the starvation, the constant pressure to remain silent. They took me to the hospital for a thorough checkup. The doctor's expression darkened almost immediately. My body was severely underweight. My ribs protruded sharply beneath my skin, and dark circles framed my eyes like bruises. "When was the last time you ate?" they asked gently. "3 days ago," I muttered, but I didn't chew quietly enough. My mother appeared at the hospital, her voice saccharine, honeyed in front of the staff. "She has an eating disorder," she said smoothly, presenting a meticulously forged medical file. "I've been trying to help her, but she refuses to eat." I wanted to scream, to shatter the lie, but my voice had been dulled by years of enforced silence. CPS conducted a home visit, but my mother had anticipated it. The refrigerator was overflowing with food, my score chart had vanished, and my bedroom gleamed as if prepped for guests. "I use a behavior chart to encourage her to do chores," she explained with a practiced smile. Anna promised to return, but that evening my mother led me down to the basement. She pointed to a small, padded room with soundproof walls, the door locked from the outside. "This is where you will learn self-control," she said, her tone icy, devoid of warmth. "Dr. Mendez recommended it." I knew there was no Dr. Mendez. She shoved me inside and locked the door. Darkness enveloped me, thick and suffocating. The only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like a drum. I counted the seconds, minutes, perhaps hours, but eventually I lost track, disoriented, trapped in a timeless void. When the door finally opened, the sudden light burned my eyes. "How does it feel?" she asked, as if this were some kind of therapeutic exercise. I couldn't answer. My throat was parched from screaming silently, from the futility of attempting to make my suffering audible. The isolation escalated. My mother introduced noise-canceling headphones, forcing me to wear them constantly at home except during meals. White noise blotted out the world, disorienting me, making the walls of my own house seem foreign and unrecognizable. She called it sensory therapy for an auditory processing disorder I didn't have. If I dared to remove the headphones, she would brandish a fabricated doctor's note, threatening that CPS would believe I was mentally ill. Every act of autonomy, every instinct to remove the suffocating device, was met with intimidation and fabricated authority. The routine became a prison within a prison. I would sit at my desk, eyes wide and vigilant, the white noise a constant drone in my ears, a signal of my captivity. Meals were tense negotiations. Even the sound of my fork scraping the plate was magnified into an imagined catastrophe. My mother would hover, measuring, judging, ready to escalate at the slightest misstep. Cool offered little respite. Anna promised to follow up, but visits were sporadic. My mother's manipulations were meticulous. She knew how to mask the abuse, how to create the illusion of a caring parent. The charts, the staged order, the padded room, everything was a carefully choreographed deception. Yet beneath the surface, I felt the sharp, undeniable truth of her cruelty, a truth that no note or explanation could obscure. I began to lose my sense of time and space. Hours bled into one another, my world reduced to the constant hum of white noise and the oppressive stillness imposed by my mother. Even my thoughts became measured. Every internal syllable was weighed for its potential sound. I learned to move, to breathe, to exist as silently as possible, a shadow navigating a house that had become a labyrinth of fear. Nights were the worst. Padded room loomed in my mind even when I slept, a specter that haunted my dreams. Sometimes I would wake in cold sweats, convinced I had been locked inside again, my body stiff, my heart thrumming as if it might burst. The headphones never left my head for long, their constant drone a reminder that freedom was conditional, contingent upon a carefully maintained silence. Yet even in this suffocating environment, small moments of awareness pierced through. I realized that the fear, the manipulation, the abuse, all of it was a performance my mother controlled. The CPS visits, the fabricated files, the supposed therapy, it was all an intricate illusion meant to maintain dominance and conceal truth. Each instance of control reinforced the boundaries of my captivity, yet also mapped the contours of my eventual escape. I had been trained to obey, to vanish, to shrink within myself. But in those rare moments when I glimpsed the reality outside the padded walls, outside the white noise, I understood something essential. The world beyond my mother's manipulations existed. There were people who could hear me, see me, and believe me. The house, the charts, the headphones, they could be observed, challenged, dismantled. Even as my mother insisted on her therapy, the constant tension, the threat, and the silence cultivated within me a hidden resilience. I began to recognize the mechanisms of her abuse, the patterns, the lies, the strategies of deception. And in that recognition lay a seed of strength, fragile but persistent, that whispered a promise. One day I might reclaim my life, step beyond the walls she had constructed, and be heard. The first step had already been taken with Anna and Ms. Sofia. Though my body trembled and my voice faltered, a part of me realized that the silence could eventually end, that survival might one day mean speaking freely without fear and trusting someone to listen. I lived like a puppet, moving between school and the padded room in a daze, my mind fogged by the drugs my mother secretly mixed into my food. School, I was nearly invisible, a ghost weaving through corridors, my presence barely acknowledged. Yet one temporary teacher, Lara, 27, who had once worked in humanitarian relief, sensed that something was terribly wrong. One day, during art class, I found myself unconsciously tapping a pen against the desk in a Morse code pattern I had learned from an old film. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. Lara froze, her eyes narrowing as she stared at me. After class, she slid a small slip of paper across the table. "I know you're in danger. Tap back if that's true." I hesitated, then tapped 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, the universal SOS. Her eyes widened slightly and she wrote again, "I'll help. Be careful." That small exchange sparked a cautious alliance, a glimmer of hope in the midst of years of silence and fear. Lara began to investigate. She discovered that my mother had done this before with another child, a boy named Miguel. Officially, he had moved in with relatives, but Lara uncovered evidence suggesting he had been sent to a shadowy facility far from public scrutiny. Lara discreetly contacted Ms. Sofia, and together they began gathering evidence of my mother's abuses. But my mother always seemed a step ahead. She appeared at school, papers in hand, spinning elaborate lies about my behavior. According to her, I suffered from oppositional defiant disorder, a convenient narrative that cast me as the problem rather than her. She even confronted Lara, threatening her subtly, instilling enough fear for Lara to temporarily withdraw her attention, buying my mother more time to manipulate the situation. One night, she woke me abruptly, her grip firm on my arm, and shoved me into a car along with several suitcases. "We're going to a place that will help you," she said smoothly, her tone eerily calm. We drove hours to a facility in the Portuguese countryside called Casa Serenidade, the House of Serenity. But there was nothing serene about it. The building resembled a prison more than a place of healing, a warehouse for abandoned and controlled children. The nurses maintained strict control with medications, silenced us with rules forbidding speech, and locked us in windowless rooms. I was placed in a tiny chamber, surveillance cameras blinking ominously in each corner, and forced to take drugs that muddled my mind further. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and fear, the hum of fluorescent lights a constant reminder of my captivity. I could hear whispers and cries through walls that weren't quite soundproof, each one a testament to the despair that permeated the place. Yet even here, Lara and Ms. Sofia did not relent. Lara uncovered Miguel's records, realizing that my mother had bribed a Dr. Mendez to falsify paperwork, creating the illusion of medical authorization for sending me to Casa Serenidade. Armed with this information, Lara and Ms. Sofia contacted the authorities, providing evidence of the soundproof rooms, the falsified documents, and audio recordings my mother had manipulated to paint me as a troubled, dangerous child. I was trapped, but now at least there was a lifeline. The world outside my mother's meticulously constructed prison existed. Lara's and Ms. Sofia's relentless pursuit of the truth provided a glimmer of hope, a thread I could cling to in the darkness. Even as my brain swirled with confusion from the drugs, I recognized patterns, the ways my mother orchestrated my compliance, the rhythms of her lies, the choreography of her control. Days at Casa Serenidade blurred into one another. Meals were administered silently, with nurses observing like hawks. Sleep came in small, broken intervals, punctuated by the sterile clatter of locks and the soft murmur of other children suffering. The white noise from machines in the hallways seeped into my room, amplifying my disorientation. I could no longer distinguish the boundary between inside and outside, between reality and the meticulously constructed illusion my mother had designed. Yet in this imposed silence, a quiet resistance began to form. I remembered the tapping in Lara's class, the SOS that had sparked action. That tiny signal had transcended the layers of control, a small defiance asserting that I existed outside my mother's narrative. It was a fragile spark, but it reminded me that communication, even secret, coded communication, was still possible. Lara and Ms. Sofia's work accelerated. They coordinated with the police, providing documentation, testimonies, and evidence that dismantled the carefully curated facade my mother had created. They explained the patterns, the padded rooms, the forced medication, the threats, the previous victim, Miguel. The authorities listened, taking meticulous notes, connecting the dots that had remained invisible to the outside world for years. Inside Casa Serenidade, I began to notice small openings, small moments when the guards' attention drifted, when medication schedules allowed brief lucidity. I clung to these moments, preserving the thought of freedom in my mind. My heart still raced with fear, but each day reinforced the knowledge that my silence could now be leveraged as a tool, not just a survival mechanism. Contrast between the oppressive structure of the facility and the persistent efforts of Lara and Ms. Sofia was stark. On one side, I was a captive, drugged, and surveilled. On the other, there were people outside who believed me, who saw the cruelty for what it was and were actively dismantling it. That knowledge, though indirect, became a subtle balm, a quiet reassurance that my struggle was acknowledged. For the first time, I started to imagine life outside the meticulously constructed cages of my mother's making. I imagined sunlight on my face without fear, the simple act of speaking without calculation, walking without listening for every sound that might provoke wrath. The thought was almost intoxicating in its novelty, a dream shaped from the fragments of hope that Lara and Ms. Sofia had sown into my life. Casa Serenidade had become a crucible, refining both fear and resilience. My body, weakened by neglect and drugs, and my mind, dulled by years of enforced compliance, were nonetheless capable of small acts of defiance and observation. Each day, I cataloged my surroundings, noted routines, memorized shifts and nurse rotations. I tapped out signals in secret, practiced minute movements with precision, aware that even tiny gestures could become crucial. Lara and Ms. Sofia's dogged determination eventually bore fruit. Investigations intensified, authorities prepared for intervention, and my mother's web of lies began to unravel. I realized that my survival had never been just about silence. It had been about persistence, observation, and the faint, almost imperceptible threads of communication that could pierce the veil of control. And though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, I knew something fundamental. The walls that confined me physically could not contain the truth, nor could they contain the growing resolve within me. In the midst of Casa Serenidade's cold, suffocating halls, I held on to that truth, the knowledge that freedom, however distant, was still possible, and that I was no longer entirely alone in seeking it. One morning, the police raided the facility. I was escorted outside, and the sudden sunlight blinded me, so long had I been confined in shadowed rooms. The warmth, the brilliance, it was almost painful. Ms. Sofia was there, enveloping me in a tight embrace, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Pamma, for not acting sooner," she whispered. I could only nod, the weight of years of fear pressing down, now lifting in waves of relief. My mother and Dr. Mendez were arrested on the spot. Court proceedings revealed the full scope of their deception: falsified journals, over-medication, the padded isolation rooms. The truth emerged. My mother had never suffered from misophonia. It had been a lie, a carefully constructed excuse to control me, to manipulate and terrify. My mother was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Mendez received 25 for his complicity. Casa Serenidade was shut down, and the other children were placed in safe homes. I moved in with my Aunt Clara, 48, a chef in Porto who loved me like her own. Her house was filled with warmth, laughter, and the intoxicating smells of food. She encouraged me to speak loudly, to sing, even to smash dishes if I felt the need. Slowly, I began to reclaim the sounds of life that had once terrified me. At school, I joined an art class, expressing my story through paint and brushstrokes. Silent confessions turned into vibrant narratives. Over time, I learned not to fear sound, not to fear my own presence. I began a graphic design project, creating posters to raise awareness about child abuse and the importance of protecting children. Felt like my voice, once suppressed, was now reaching the world, helping others even as I healed myself. The day I testified in court, I looked my mother directly in the eyes. I recounted everything: the point system, the padded rooms, the suffocating fear. She tried to lie, to twist the story, but the judge cut her off firmly. When she was led away in handcuffs, I stood tall, no longer the silent, shrinking girl I had once been. I had a voice, and I was no longer afraid to use it. At 18, I found myself in Aunt Clara's kitchen, surrounded by friends, laughter, and music filling every corner of the house. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds wash over me: the clinking of dishes, the hum of conversation, the rhythm of life itself. I was free, truly free. From my journey, I want to share 5 important lessons. 1. Your voice matters. Even in silence, even when fear seems overwhelming, your story has power. Speak when you can, in whatever form is possible: words, art, or small signals, and find those who will listen. 2. Survival often requires subtle defiance. When trapped in oppressive circumstances, small acts of resistance can become lifelines. Tap, whisper, hide, whatever it takes to maintain hope until help arrives. 3. Healing starts with trust. Surround yourself with people who see you, who validate your experience, who will fight for you. Clara, Ms. Sofia, and Lara reminded me that support can transform fear into courage. For fear can be unlearned. Years of terror can warp perception, but with patience and safety, it's possible to re-engage with the world, to rediscover joy, laughter, and even chaos without dread. 5. Use your experience to empower others. Sharing your story, advocating for those who cannot speak, and transforming trauma into action gives meaning to survival. My art, my designs, my voice in court, they were my way of reclaiming power and helping others avoid the suffering I endured. If my story resonates with you, I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's create a community that listens, supports, and protects those who cannot yet speak for themselves. Every view, every click, every conversation helps shine a light on hidden struggles and reminds survivors that they are not alone. Freedom is more than escaping a physical cage. It's reclaiming your voice, your choices, and your right to exist without fear. Today, I live fully, laugh loudly, and create boldly. I am Pamma, once silent, now unafraid. And my story is proof that even from the deepest darkness, light can emerge.